In the 40s, when white people start really consuming race music in droves, and they had been since the 20s, but when white people really start wanting to consume it even more, it was given a new term. The word race music was dropped, and they changed the name to rhythm and blues. Same music, different name, just to make it acceptable to be purchased by white people. Then, when white people, it's not enough for white people just to consume the music. When they want to purchase the music and play the music, the name was changed to rock and roll. The same music, but played by white people, is rock and roll. You could take one tune by a black person, like say Shake, Rattle, and Roll by Big Joe Turner. That's R&B. But when, say, Pat Boone does it, a white guy, it's called rock and roll. And that has since become the term for white pop music, rock and roll. That's a white people's thing. But no one really knows the fact that the word rock and roll is a black vernacular term for sex.
Do you know that telling a story is one of the most powerful ways to connect with your audience? Do you know that the human brain processes story much more easily and quickly than facts and figure? Stories are a great way to engage your audience, get them interested in your products and services, and inspire them to take action. A good story will help you create more compelling content that can be shared on social media or through other channels. And it's not just about telling a compelling story, it's also about knowing how to tell it effectively. Now, do you want to better connect with your audience? Then join us on our online training class, Storytelling for Content Creators and Digital Entrepreneurs. Come to obehil1food.com/storytelling and learn how to leverage your storytelling skill to earn more as a content creator and digital entrepreneur. Storytelling is a powerful way to connect with your audience, so let's explore it together. See you in the class.
And most white people, no idea. If you rocking and rolling all night long, that means you with your honey doing what you want to do and having a good time. And there's plenty of examples to show that, but with white people not listening to that music at all, it just gets thrown away and it's just gone. And in that regard, because of the separation of things, only about a quarter of black music ever made it to the pop radio realm for white consumption. So on the walls behind me, I have hundreds and hundreds of black recordings that are absolutely amazing that are largely unknown because they weren't part of that little bit that crossed over into white consciousness. And it's sad that these people have been forgotten, but I'm lucky that I have these original examples because as a kid, my mother would bring home Victrolas, designed to play the 78 RPM records when I was a kid. She'd bring those home and I could tinker with them and fix them. And I just fell in love with the music that was played on them. And so that's how I started to learn to play music by myself, was with these older recordings. So by the time I was able to gig, I sounded like a guy who had been dead for 30 years. And so all the older guys loved me. They thought it was cool and encouraged me. And the younger people just thought, like, why are you playing all that old stuff? Like, dude, this old stuff is way better than what we as a generation are doing. Like, you hit a button and a beat starts, and you talking about bitches and hoes and stuff. Like, in the old days, they would talk about those things, but they would hide it in double entendre where it'd be clever, where you get a little giggle. Nowadays, they just go right in on it. And it's just like, man, we used to be a lot more subtle. Used to be a little more of a trickster aspect to it. And so the commodification of black cultural expressions has served to handicap us. It cuts us off at the knee. We don't get to give the full breadth of our humanity. It's missing. And when white people would tell me that my sound was too traditional, that was basically them saying, no, you're not giving it to us the right way. We acknowledge that those things exist and that they're real, but it's not, we are the judge at the end of the day, and you should give us what we want. Otherwise, we're not going to hire you. You will not get paid. You won't get any money. You won't get any prestige. You won't get any work. And unfortunately, a lot of us black people will adhere to that. We'll do whatever white people have determined is the pinnacle and hit that, and the one who is picked by the white people to be the best, then everyone aspires to that pinnacle, whether it has any artistic or cultural merit or not. And that emptiness is sickening to me because it's so much wasted opportunity, and I see so many super talented Black people who are preoccupied with that, and in my estimation, they're wasting their talent.
All right, now there's another important question I would like to ask there. Now, these artists, these musicians that are producing this music that are sort of appealing to the white people, how much are they actually patronized in the African American community? Are they sponsoring this project? Are they willing to pay so that these artists can also advance in their career? Are they spending their money to make sure that these artists are successful in their production?
In the US, not anymore. Not like we used to. Where like even when Thelonious Monk, Ahmad Jamal, John Coltrane were being basically derided in the press, Black people came to see them in droves because they knew the beauty behind it and didn't care. Nowadays, the ones who get anointed, they're the ones who are the pinnacle, and that's what particularly younger people will look to. And mostly because there are so few examples of Black people who are willing to fight the good fight and maintain their integrity, because it's difficult to maintain your integrity when there's so many detractors and so many other examples that are easier to consume, right? And there are plenty of Black artists who will change the way that they do things for that acceptability, to where you listen to their recordings or their writing or any of their offerings before fame, and there's a potency that is just that far outweighs what they do now. And it's a real shame because I know a lot of jazz musicians who were just phoning it in literally, and and they're not giving their best part of themselves. They're not giving their best effort because they don't have to, or because they're so stretched thin that they don't have time to go in the shed and practice and to really find their artistic voice the way that they used to. They just don't have the energy to do it anymore because they're caught on that hamster wheel. So it's out there, but there are very few, and those of us who choose to do it that way suffer. I know quite a few really talented Black musicians who are living in abject poverty because they choose to exist with integrity, for better or for worse. There are a few who are doing the do, but they really shouldn't suffer the way that they have. And if we were closer the way that we had been before assimilation, this probably wouldn't be an issue because there would be enough Black people who appreciate them to give them the sort of environment that they need to thrive, where it's not, you don't need a whole bunch of money or a whole bunch of accolades. You just need a little bit of space to have what you have and do what you do. To have to struggle from out through, because of outside forces to be your best is, more realistically, it's hard to convince a child. It's difficult to convince a child to take that more difficult route. And I struggle with that myself, but at the end of the day, life is fleeting, and you want to make sure that when you clock out, that what people say about you is true and accurate, and you can only do that by maintaining what you say and do during your life. Because if you live in a compartmentalized way, it comes out, particularly if you're not around anymore to protect that image. If your image is that weak or that fleeting or that fake, right? That won't, if you're not alive to maintain it, it's gone. So it's a difficult position to be in, but at the same time, I try to be the same kind of elder that I had, to give the information to younger people so that they can make their own choices. And I hope that they see enough beauty in the way that I and others like me have chosen to go, that they will take those hits in order to do the right thing.
Okay, so as an expert in music, and because we are talking of the kind of music that should represent the people, looking at our culture, our value system, who would you say are your best type of musician? Who would you say better represented are the people that you know of? This could be maybe when you were much younger or even now. Why not? So please go ahead and share that with us.
Okay, as far as like people who were like famous or on the scene or well known, Stevie Wonder, of course. Songs in the Key of Life came out when I was 2, and I heard it daily. You know, as a child, it was such an amazing record. Duke Ellington, John Coltrane, um, Ahmad Jamal, Bob Marley, um, Fela Kuti, and a whole host of jazz musicians who were long dead before I came along. You know, Coleman Hawkins and James P. Johnson. You know, people who existed with charisma and some bump and some thump. Earth, Wind, and Fire, of course, because they came the closest to recognizing the totality of the Black musical experience in their music. They started with jazz. They didn't go all the way back into ragtime, but they had blues, they had funk, they had jazz, they had gospel, they had the whole thing. And then whatever the vestiges from Africa they had picked up, you know, playing mbiras, various hand drums, using polyrhythm, and those sorts of things, cowbells and such. That was a huge eye opener for me. And as far as playing goes, because I was a saxophonist, Sonny Stitt, Cannonball Adderley, Johnny Hodges, Tab Smith, Charlie Parker, Stanley Turrentine, beautiful players, just really fluid. Like you could hear the way that they played the saxophone was almost like they were speaking their language. Like it was like spoken, you know, like they could rhyme or something, you know. That stuff was very important to me. But again, I learned a lot of what I know from 78 RPM recordings from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. You know, really old music, even by the standards of the 80s when I was a kid, you know. And so that was the stuff I really looked up to. And on top of that, there was a group that was around when I was a kid called Fishbone out of Los Angeles. And they personified a lot of what I came to be, where they were a bunch of weirdos, where they had ska, rocksteady, reggae, punk, funk, metal, gospel. Everything was in their music and all just mixed together because it all came from the same Black root. And so they just mixed and matched it regardless of genre, which freaked people out in the industry. And of course, people who were used to consuming Black music, which was either R&B or hip hop or gospel, were like, no, we're all those things. And for you to separate us up into these genres does a disservice to both us and you, because it denies the totality of our human expression. And it limits your ability to accept us for who we are. And I love the way George Clinton from Funkadelic, another absolutely influential individual, because he was such a weirdo and so clever, the way he used technology was brilliant. The way he described them was the reason why they struggle the way that they do to this day is that they were too Black for white people and too white for Black people, because Black people become so compartmentalized where if you don't talk about bitches and hoes and blah, 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 and fit into this little box that is acceptable, this white made pinnacle, we don't like you. We don't want anything to do with you. The same thing happened to Jimi Hendrix, where he made the Band of Gypsies recordings because he was getting pressure from the Black Panthers for not making Black music, even though the way that he wanted to play was not acceptable to a lot of Black people. So they wanted to force him into a box, even though it's like, why would I want to be in that box? Let me express myself. White people do this to us all the time. Why would we do it to ourselves? Which is really frustrating for him. And it's been frustrating for me my whole life. And for cats like Fishbone or even like Bad Brains, another group out of DC, they would mix reggae with speed metal and punk, real potent stuff, and sing about the struggles of what it means to be a Black person in the United States, where their music to me, like say like if you take Fishbone's Rockstar and talking about racism in the music industry, and it's a speed metal tune that's mixed with some ska, that is just as potent as NWA's Fuck the Police. Except the Fishbone piece is based off of all of their lived experiences within the music industry. Fuck the Police is something that's made up, right? Where they put the police on trial and stuff and all that sort of thing. And that's just a made up thing that they created in the studio. But Fishbone's just as valid because it talks about a real Black experience, but then they're not acceptable because they're not talking about bitches and hoes and stuff, which is really frustrating to me because we're just wasting our potential. And these guys are amazing. And they're still out there struggling. You know, like you could walk up to them on the street. These are guys who should be wealthy beyond their wildest dreams and doing whatever they want, but they still have to tour. They still have to, you know, do all this thing, all these things about like they got to live life on the road, which is hard. Like that's a young man's game. When these guys are in their 50s, approaching 60, you can't do that for that long, man. Especially because they don't make a whole lot of money, so they're struggling, you know. And it's a shame to see these Black elders struggle the way that they do because they really should occupy a real point of reverence, but they're still unknown.